Hello and welcome to today's millinery class. So in today's class we are doing a Hatinator. We're going to be doing the base and then we'll do a small crown to go with it. Okay, before we dive in, I'd like to say that if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, that you subscribe and hit on the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video is uploaded. So let's go through the things we'll be needing for the project. We'll need a bird cage veil. And we'll need some ribbons, we'll need some feathers as well, and then of course our cinnamon, and then a fabric. Okay, you can always do away with the fabric or use a fabric. If you don't have a fabric, you can just leave it out and only work with the cinnamon, and that will be fine. Then you also need your sewing thread. I'm going to decide whether I'm going to use a black cotton thread or the fisherman's cord. And then of course my needle, my cutting edge, and then my craft pegs, then my tape measure. So these are the tools and materials you're going to need for the project. As I go on, if I think I would need to put in a few petals or beads, I'll have to add that, but all of those are up to you and what you decide to do, because those are just the embellishments. Okay, so we'll do that quickly and we'll get to know how the outcome is. Okay, so we are going to be using a polystyrene half circle for our brim as our mold, and the circumference of the polystyrene is 11 inches for this one. So we're going to have to get a millinery wire that will help us shape the crown when we finish molding it. Okay, so you are going to cut 13 inches or 12 inches long millinery wire, and then you join it like we usually do. Okay, but make sure that after you've done that, the finished circumference will be 11 inches, just like that of your mold. And then with a cotton thread or thread, just bound the overlap together. So when you cut it at 12 inches, you're going to overlap it at the 2-inch difference, and then you bind it up with your cotton thread just to keep it in place. And then you do the same for your bigger, or for the crown, millinery wire for the crown, and the length of that is 29 inches. You can add 2 or 3 inches extra to it. So your millinery wire, you're going to be cutting it at 31 or 32 inches, just so that you can overlap it and then bind it up to have a circle. So, but we know that we are going to be working with a bird cage veil with a length of 29 inches. Okay, so you cut your bird cage net 29 inches, and then you cut your millinery wire a little bit longer than the bird cage net, just because of the overlap you'll be doing at this end. Okay, then you cut a cotton, then you cut your fabric, whatever fabric you're going to use to cover your cinnamon. It's up to you, but you can leave this step out if you want to. It's not an important step at all. So the diameter for the fabric is 8 inches in diameter. It shouldn't be a perfect circle. After we finish molding our cinnamon onto our mold, we would wrap this again around it to have a different effect. Basically that is it, but our brim is entirely going to be in a bird cage net. Okay, so now when we have everything in place, let's go on ahead to cover our millinery wire with a black ribbon. The reason why we are doing that is we're doing our brim with a bird cage net, and if we don't cover the ends with a black ribbon, it's going to be showing. You get it? It's going to be showing in there as white, and that is what we don't want. So we are going to cover the millinery wire with a black ribbon, just so that it matches with everything we are doing. So I'll get some hot glue or whatever glue you have. You just put a little bit on it, stick it around it like that, and then gently wrap your ribbon all over it. Okay, so you come to the end. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it all around it, and when I come to the end here, I finish it off with a glue to hold it down so that we have it all in a uniform color. Okay, so I just finished wrapping. Now we're going to go on to mold our crown. Okay, the little crown we have. So I'm going to take my cinnamon as it is from this end, fold it on towards itself in the bias form like we did in the previous video. Okay, so I'm just going to work with this bit. I don't want to waste too much of fabric, so I'm going to cut this bit out and then wet it a little bit just so that it's malleable to work with, and then I'll come back and then we mold it on. So okay, so now I have my cinnamon. I'm going to wet it a little bit with a spray gun and some water just to try and dampen it a bit so that I can actually stretch it over my mold. Now I'm going to try and do it this way. If it doesn't work well, then I'm going to add steam to it to try and, but once water goes on top of it, you are able to stretch it out in the directions you want it to be. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is try and put one tap pin in the center here to hold it down, and then you're going to be stretching in the north, south, east, west direction first. So I'm going to try and pull this bit here down, okay, and then put some pin in place to hold it down like that, and then do the opposite direction as well. Okay, so you're going to be working in the north, east, west direction. And when I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and do this other bit here. Okay, you can use blocking pins if you want, but I'm going to try and do it with this one here as well. My pins keep coming out, but hopefully I'll be able to work with this bit here and then do this as well. Okay, so I have done all the corners. Now the next bit is to do in betweens all of them. Okay, you can keep wetting it some more to be able to stretch your fabric, because this is what we don't want. Okay, so when you wet it, it's able to respond to exactly whatever you are doing. Okay, so and then try and put some more pins along it, but I make sure that I'm going to stretch the fold out of place. All right, so I'm going to carry on with it and then stretch it all over the polystyrene half ball and then bring it back. Okay, so I finished doing the blocking. You can see it looks like a mushroom head, and it was a bit difficult doing the blocking because the pins wouldn't stay into the polystyrene ball, but I got there eventually. If it's going to be difficult, you can just pull the whole bit around it like that and then tie it to the thread. Then as you work along, you'll be pulling them in betweens to stretch the whole bit out and have it looking like what I have here. Okay, now the next thing is to apply some stiffener to keep the shape firm. So we are going to be doing that with the PV glue. Okay, that's an alternative for a hat stiffener, and I'm going to be mixing it with water. So I'm going to be do 1 part of glue to 4 parts of water. Some people do it 3:1, but I want to do it 4:1 or 1:4, whichever way. So I'll put some glue in there. I'm just going to eyeball it. I know exactly how the quantity I need in the water, so I'm doing 1:4. I don't want too much of it because sometimes it tends to cover up the holes of everything and then it makes it look white, but I want to have a solution with some glue in it as the stiffener for it. Okay, so keep it in place. So that is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to turn it upside down and make sure that I'm going in between this bit. Don't just do it and end here. Go in a bit because you're going to need all of that as well, and that is where your millimeter wire is going to sit. Okay, so you go in a bit with your solution and make sure you've gone over the whole bit. Every bit of it needs it as well. Then you leave it to dry. Okay, so now let's get on and work on the brim. Okay, so you grab your bird cage net, put the ends together like that. Okay, so you should have them in 2 bits. Make sure that your squares or the holes are overlapping or lying on top of each other. If you can get them to lie on top of each other, that would be perfect before we start stitching. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do now. I believe that once you get a few of them or a couple of them to lie on top of each other, you can get the rest, or hopefully going in on top of each other like that. Okay, so I'm going to be holding my bird cage net like that, if you can see, and then I'm going to slide this in here, because that is exactly what you want the effect to be. Okay, I'm going to be stitching in the holes. So I have my millinery wire going in like that, and then my bird cage net coming on top of it. So I'm going to be going through these holes and these holes, and then be stitching all along. I'm doing it with a cotton thread. If you don't have a cotton thread, you can always use the fisherman's cord or whatever you have. I'm going to start here like that. Try and secure my knot. So as usual, draw your string, but not to the very end. Bring your needle back in and pull it like we always do to secure that end. Then we go through the net, but at the points that are meeting like that. Okay, so I'm going to go through all of it in bigger strides, right? We are kind of gathering the whole bit towards the center. So I'm going to carry on to the very end. Okay, so I've been able to gather it all to the center. I'm going to hold it because we want it to be tied around the millinery wire. Okay, so you hold it in the center, bring them together like that. At this point, we still have our opening that we are going to sort out later, stitch it close. But then before then, you're going to bring the whole thing into the center like this with your thread still hanging on. Okay, and then twist it to tighten it. Okay, so as you twist, every twist sends in some tension. Okay, but make sure you are doing it in the center. It has to be in the center, so be sure it's centered before you twist. Okay, so you twist it just enough to keep working with it. If you twist it too much, the tension is going to distort the shape of your millinery wire. We want to still keep it as round as it is, but we want to give it some tension to also work with it, and make sure that it's not so tight, so that we can stitch the crown on top of it here. Okay, so I think I'm okay with this. I'm just going to tie it round with my thread, excess thread, to keep it the shape in place, and then we can cut it off from there after we've made a knot with it. I'll leave it like this. We'll definitely cut this bit off when we put the crown on top of it. So this is the base of our Hatinator. I like what I'm seeing. I think it's pretty nice. Before we go away, let's stitch this opening. Okay, you can see it. We're going to stitch it close. So I'm going to try to overlap it with this bit here, and then at every point I'll put a stitch there to keep them together. Okay, so I'm going to bring these two ends to meet at this bit here. Okay, and then join it with the stitch and carry it on through with that until I finish at the end. So I'm going to do one stitch for you to see, and then I'll carry the rest off camera. Right, yeah, so I brought this back. I'm going to take out the pegs and the pins out, and then we can start working on it. Okay, I'm going to get the mold out of it. We have the shape, we can at least work with this shape now, but we need to keep it a bit firmer. So I'm going to cut off all the excess, trim it off. So we have it now. Now the next thing is to put the small millinery wire in between it. So the point where that bridge is, you know, that is where we are going to put the millinery wire, right, like that, to shape it some more. When we finish, we can always cut off the excess properly, but let's shape it well. I wasn't patient enough to wait for it to dry, but I believe we can still work with it this way. Okay, so we're going to shape it, and at this point we're going to bring our lace fabric on top of it, okay, before we do our stitching. So the lace fabric goes on top of it like that. Always you work at the north, south, east as always, and then you spread it out in the other directions you want it to be. So we're going to spread it into these directions, and then we'll do our stitch to keep it in place, right? So it's looking exactly the way I want it to be, right? Okay, so we have it looking like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a stitch. So I'm going to be doing an overcast stitch. Now wait, I'll take you through that. Okay, so I'm going to go in like that. Yeah, I've done my thread on the double. I'm going to go in, and as always, make sure you're catching onto your millinery wire, because that's actually what is going to shape the whole thing. Yeah, so I'm going to go in like that, okay? And then go back into my thread, like what I have, and then we keep going. So we take our longer stitches in, and then as always our shorter stitches are out, right? So my short stitch is coming out here, so we don't even see that at all. You see it, but my longer stitches are in here. So it's longer in here and shorter out here. So it's longer, as you can see, everything is black, so you can't really see, but at the end out here, I'm just picking a little bit on the cloth and you don't see it, but the essence is we are stitching in our millinery wire, which is shaping the whole thing beautifully. And as you go ahead, you make sure that you're pulling on your fabric if you're using a fabric, so that the fabric is stretched evenly around the whole thing. So I'm going to carry on and do the stitching, and then we take it from there. Okay, so now I have my crown. I finished stitching everything onto it. I like the way it's looking now. It's so hard and it's looking great. I'm going to just trim the excess fabric off it and then attach it to the brim. Okay, I'll make sure it's in the center before I start stitching. So I'm going to turn it inside out here and then stitch the fabric onto the bird cage neck all the way around before we take this bit out of it. Okay, so you're going to leave it the way it is and then stitch it on before you cut it out. If you cut it out before you stitch, it's going to be difficult, but when you finish stitching every bit onto it, then you can cut this bit out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then bring it back here. Okay, so I've taken all the excesses in here. You can see it, I just trimmed it out. I'm going to put it in here. I still have my needle connected to it, so I'll be stitching that right at the brim. Okay, at the edge here is what I'm going to be stitching on. I'm going to try and center this bit onto it, and then turn it inside out and be sure that it's in the center. So I have to be sure that the distance from here to all around it is equal. And when I have done that, I'm going to bring my needle back in like that and start stitching these bits onto it. So I'm just going to be doing like an overcast stitch, catching on onto the crown and then the bird cage net. I'm going to stitch it all the way around and then bring it back. So it's just like an overcast stitch. You pick over it a little bit like that, and make sure that your stitches are close together, because when you cut it and it's not that close, it's going to be pulling away. Okay, so quite close to it is what we want, not far apart, very close to each other, the stitches. So I'm going to carry on off camera, do it and bring it back. Okay, so I've stitched the whole bit in. The next thing to do is to cut it through and take the inner bit out. So that's what I'm doing now. So remember, you have to stitch the crown to the base before you go on to do this next step. Okay, so this is what I've done. I'm going to trim it off beautifully. Okay, so I'm going to try to finish the inner side of the crown with this ribbon. I'm going to put some glue here and then just stick the ribbon all the way around it to finish it off beautifully like that. I'm going to be using the glue gun. Okay, so at this point I've just embellished it with red and black feathers. I'm going to be doing a few pearl beads at this bit here to cover up all the mess, and then that will be it. Okay, so we've come to the end of today's project. As you can see, I just put a small Alice band there and got some, I should have used black felt to patch it up here and hold it together, but I didn't have black, so I used red. But the appropriate thing should have been black so that they all blend into it beautifully. But that is what we have here. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you've not done that already, and then hit on the notification bell to be notified when a new video is uploaded. Until we meet again in our next video, have a nice day.